Hello, everybody. I believe it's now on the dot 11:30 and a good time to begin the webinar. I see a few participants dropping in, so I think we'll kick things off. So first of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to Assess First for approaching us about doing a webinar. We were discussing topics of interest to discuss. And of course, you know, one of the big themes in recruitment right now is around automation and technology and machine learning. If you go to any recruitment event over the past year or so, you would see that this is a huge topic in the industry. So what we want to do today is discuss the webinar topic: is automated technology killing recruiting? So how today's webinar is going to unfold, we're going to start off with some brief introductions. So who's on the webinar, what are our backgrounds, before we go into AI, machine learning and automation, and what's the difference between these things. And we're then going to go in where in the process can automation be used. We're then going to look at what are the perceived benefits and threats, how do we picture the recruitment team of the future, and recruitment automation landscapes, the best practices with some case studies, and we're going to take a zoom in on AGAS, VONQ, and Assess First. I think Lee has now fixed his microphone, so we should be all good to go. So hopefully by the end of this, we're going to have some solid ending notes where all the people joining today will have some quality things to take away. So to start off with introductions, I'll first introduce myself, hand it over to Lee, and then over to David. So myself, I'm an account executive at VONQ. So essentially, I'll help companies to recruit talent by using recruitment marketing initiatives with the help of technology and automation. So I'll hand that over now to Lee. You want to take the stage?
Hi, good morning, everybody. And thanks, Tristan. Hopefully you can all hear me now. Had a little mini panic there. So yeah, my name's Lee. I'm Talent Acquisition Manager for AGAS Europe. I guess my story is that I joined AGAS back in January 2018, initially just for a couple of days work to help them out with a few bits like writing job ads and helping them source a few people. And I guess what morphed into a couple of days work eventually turned into weeks, which turned into months. And since September, I've been helping them to build a TA function, which helps them hire quite aggressively across Europe. So largely in the UK, Germany and the Netherlands. It's been a fascinating journey. We've had to learn quickly, fail quickly. And yeah, I'm really pleased to be here and just talk to you a little bit about what we've learned and I guess our mini steps into automation and using rec tech.
Cheers, Lee. Great. David?
Yeah. Hello. So I'm David Bernard, and I'm a psychologist, a French psychologist, as you can hear. And I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Assess First. And what we do at Assess First is that we help companies predict how well their candidates are going to succeed and thrive in the positions they are hiring for. And we do that by focusing on the real potential of people behind the resume. Yeah.
That's great. Great to have a psychologist on board to also debunk some of the myths behind the algorithm. So yeah, I think we've got a great panel today. So let's kick things off. So I want to start off by just giving a bit of a background to the topic in general. So McKinsey states that automation, digital platforms, and other innovations are changing the fundamental nature of work. And that understanding these shifts is going to be the key in how we all basically move forward. Now, the pace of technological change across all industries has been huge. And over the past few years, it's slowly been creeping into the world of recruitment. I wouldn't say it's been happening as fast, as a fast paced as within some other industries. If you look at tech, medicine, engineering, you're seeing a huge pace of change. But what we're seeing now is that this is, becoming more and more prevalent in the world of recruitment. So ultimately, what we want to do with this webinar is to try and understand where are we at right now in the journey of technology and recruitment. You know, where do we stand? Where are our businesses in this whole spectrum of recruitment? And maybe we can, along the way, also, you know, try and get some best practices that we've learned from other industries as well, because with technology, there comes a lot of problems and there also comes a lot of benefits. And it all comes down to how you implement it in the first place. So hopefully we can share some of those insights with you along the way. So I wanted to start off with first trying to get a better definition of some of the terms that are in the technology space right now. So we hear a lot of words going around, a lot of jargon in terms of machine learning, automation, artificial intelligence. And to be honest, a lot of people can't really understand what the exact difference is between these. So I wanted to state that machine learning is a field of computer science that aims to teach computers how to learn and act without explicitly being programmed. So this is actually the science behind the creation of technology. It's a process that that you go through in order to actually create technology. Now, automation is simply the technology by which a process or a procedure is performed with minimal human assistance. Now, artificial intelligence, which I think is the biggest debate of them all, because a lot of people are debating whether this actually exists, whether it doesn't exist, but what actually is it? So artificial intelligence is the application of rapid data processing, machine learning, predictive analysis, and automation to simulate intelligent behavior. So essentially, AI is the accumulation of machine learning and automation, and what that actual end product is artificial intelligence. So still very difficult terms for everyone to get a grasp of, but I hope that gives a bit of a clear understanding of where the lines are between these. And now we'll go into later on a bit more of a debate around actually, does artificial intelligence exist? Does automation exist? Where has it been added into the process? So I wanted to ask Lee, as a recruiter, what are your thoughts on this increasing amount of technical terminology that's entering the recruitment scene? And how do you stay up to date with all of this?
Okay, so I think you hit the nail on the head. For me personally, it's jargon. You've lost me already. You know, automation, I understand. Machine learning, I'm kind of there. AI, what the hell? You know, this to me, I guess it depends on who I'm trying to impress. Okay, so if I'm going to sit down with my CTO, or I'm working in a high-tech startup, then yeah, I probably need to know this kind of stuff. I'm not saying we need to be naive and not understand it. I think we should be familiar with the terms, but do I need a detailed understanding of these things? Well, probably not. But perhaps what I should do is just familiarize myself with some of these terms. So to answer your point about how am I keeping up to date with this? Well, I guess it's just keeping abreast of what other people are talking about. So there's some obvious channels that most people are probably aware of, but you've got like Hung Lee's Recruiting Brain Food, newsletter, which comes through every Sunday morning. That's a great place to start if you're not already looking. There's some pretty good stuff there about what the future holds, and these terms are going to be littered throughout. Various Facebook groups, Recruitment Evolution, there's Badass Recruiters, Growth Hacking Recruiters. Even this morning, I had an email from the Rec Events company about their Recruitment Innovation Circus. So there's tons of stuff out there that people are, providing us content with so that we can understand these terms. Do I feel I need an in-depth understanding? No. What I want to know is whether it's machine learning, automation, or AI, how's it actually going to help me? How is it going to help me achieve my goals and help the business achieve their goals?
Yeah, so cutting through the jargon to actually
Absolutely.
What's the actual business value of these terms in your recruitment process. I think that's spot on. And actually these terms came from Hung Lee's Recruitment Brain Food, who shared a tool that can actually give definitions for these words in the recruitment space. So good shout out there. David, do you think it's actually important that recruiters understand these terms?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important because you know, this notion that the basic tools we can use to understand what exactly is going on in the field of recruiting today. And I can see some of the recruiters, they are afraid to lose their job or part of their job because of the technology. But most of the time, it's just that they do not understand what automation is really about, for example. And I think another point that is important is that today, lots of vendors are claiming that they use artificial intelligence, things like that, when they're just managing processes or computing info. So I think it can be interesting for HR people and for recruiters to know what we were talking about. Yeah.
Great. So when we look at where automation can take place in the recruitment process, so of course there are many parts of a recruitment process. So here are just some of the ways that automation can take place. So you can see it in the candidate sourcing and engagement part, candidate screening and experience, within the ATS, interview scheduling, recruitment marketing, candidate rediscovery, assessments, interviews, and background checks. So each of these segments, there are probably hundreds of different technologies that can be used, just to give you a sort of a grasp of the actual, you know, the vast landscape of recruitment technology that's out there right now. And actually, there was an Entelo study that said that the sourcing and qualification process is the prime candidate for automation, with 71% of recruiters agreeing that if they could automate their sourcing, they would be more successful in achieving their hiring goals. And I speak with a lot of companies that are really at the beginning of their journey. I mean, literally no technology in place, or the bare minimums in terms of, you know, an ATS. And I think the big question is, you know, where do we start? And one of the big issues with so many options now available is what's the most important technologies to put in place to actually get you off the ground and running. So Lee, what would be your advice to a company looking to get off the ground from scratch, or pretty much scratch?
Okay, cool. So this is relatively familiar to me because I think when I joined AGAS, they were running everything off Excel. And I spent about 4 days, wasted 4 days, just trying to get my head around what they were actually doing, with who was in what process, at what stage, which, you know, it's just a waste of time. So for me, you know, it took us the best part of 2 weeks to get some kind of ATS in place. So that for me is a good starting place. You know, actually, let's create a space where we can organize our work. You know, we can track what we're doing. So that feels like a good starting point. And I would hope, you know, that potentially most people would agree that that is a good place to kind of start to at least organize and understand what's going on in our recruitment process. But then from there, it's really, you know, where do I spend my time? And where do I add value? So, you know, classic example, you've got interview scheduling up there. If I phone John, I leave a message for John because I want to organize an interview for John, and then John calls me back and it's inconvenient, he can't talk, and I ask him for his diary and he says, well, I'll have to call you back, and then John calls me back and I miss his call, and so it goes on and on and on. And that's just stuff that I just don't want to be doing. I don't think anybody should be doing. So it's an obvious place to introduce a really simple tool, you know, and automate that piece of work and actually make it a bit more candidate friendly. So I think it's really understanding, you know, where do I want to add value? What am I good at? Where do I make that difference? So am I great at sourcing? Do I spend time there? Or, you know, is it those conversations with candidates who are later on down the funnel where I'm selling the business, you know, and helping them assess if we're a good fit for them and their career aspirations? You know, so that's kind of how I would approach this. Is really to kind of track what you're doing, where you're spending most of your time, and seriously question if you're adding value. I think the other thing to throw in is just understanding the goal. So, you know, how quick do you have to go? You know, is time a real pressure, or do we have time to play with? Because that's going to have an impact on you know, perhaps where you automate. You know, what's the quality benchmark? Again, that's going to have you know, an impact on what tool you might use, and, you know, costs. You know, when do they enter the conversation? So that'll influence your choices as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some really good tips there on where to start. I think you'd be surprised how many people that you know, approach VONQ about how to use recruitment marketing technology. And then I asked them if they even have a career site or an online application form, and they don't even have that. So it's like, okay, well, you're looking at recruitment advertising, but you've got no online application process. Like you're clearly thinking way too ahead of where you actually are. So that information is really useful. And David, as a recruitment, as an assessment technology, typically at what stage would a company look to implement something like yourselves?
I would say there are two typical situations. First one, which is a classical one, is at the very end of the selection process to validate the final candidates of a shortlist, for example. And this is how recruiters have been doing the job for years now. But the problem is that it's not really efficient because when the results of the assessment contradict their perception, lots of recruiters they just not take the assessment results into account in their final decision. So, and there is the second situation, which is the one we recommend, is to put the assessment at the very beginning of the selection process, sometimes even before asking the candidates for their resume. Because by doing so, recruiter can gather lots of very useful information, which are in some cases super predictive of the future performance of their candidate. So we can see the two way of functioning, but I would recommend the second one.
Okay, cool. That's great. So when we talk about implementing technologies, I mean, you've just mentioned a benefit there in that, you can actually put an assessment tool at the start of the process to make your quality of applications more or higher. But when we're implementing technologies and automation, what we want to do is obviously add some benefits to our business. So what are some of these key benefits? So automation is said to actually increase staff productivity savings by 10 to 50%. So the biggest impact is obviously on companies that are moving from a completely labor intense manual processes, like for instance, Lee, you mentioned only Excel sheets, to having stuff like Calendly to increase interview scheduling. That's a huge staff productivity saving. On the other hand, a faster time to hire of average 4.5 days per role. So with time savings means that you obviously have more time to invest in other parts of your process, which means that you can increase your time to hire. Now, time to hire is an interesting one because there's a lot of debate around, is this a metric we should be measuring? Do businesses understand when we say to them we've shortened the time to hire? Do they actually understand what that is? But that's to do with actually reflecting what that time to hire is on the overall cost of the business. So how much money are those people costing by not being in that role? And when you can do that and times that by the number of recs per year, you can come to an actual business cost where you can then say, well, this has been the value of this technology. And I think that's a big part when it comes to business casing, the implementation of automation, is how does that cost of implementation outweigh to the potential benefits and the cost savings to the benefits of the business. Now, one of the big things is that's being shouted out about is the elimination of unconscious bias. And this is a really interesting one because unconscious bias exists in recruiters whether you like it or not, right? There's going to be people that are going to work on gut feeling, on instinct, and this is basically unconscious bias. Now that can have a huge implication on things like diversity and selection within the business. So when we're bringing in technologies, we're claiming that this is actually going to eliminate unconscious bias because we're removing the human aspect from that particular process. So Lee, from your perspective, what are the most important benefits that you're looking to achieve when you bring in automation into the process, from things like time saving, cost per hire? What are the most important ones for you?
Sure. Yeah, I guess you've covered the main ones there. I guess the main reasons. Anybody if you're trying to, I guess, get a business case for bringing in some tech, you know, productivity and telling people that we're going to hire quicker and cut costs is always a, you know, a winner. I guess the thing that I see up that isn't up there is data, you know, insights. For me, this is really where, you know, tech can really help you advance quite quickly. So, and what I mean by that is that I'm able to make much better, much informed decisions, much more intelligent decisions as a result of having access to data and insights. So, yeah, you know, time to hire, great. You know, staff productivity, yeah, all good. But actually, if I want to be a talent advisor to my hiring manager community, do I just turn up? You know, when my hiring manager wants to, you know, to talk about a new rec, or can I help them? Can I advise them? So what can I tell them? What can I bring to the table? So if I've got some tech, you know, can I tell them, for example, you know, how long it often takes to hire to a particular vacancy, or you know, how long, I guess, what a benchmark might be for assessment, for example. And these are real conversations I'm having in my business right now. And you can see a kind of light bulb moment from hiring managers when you come on with that information. They kind of think, shit, this guy knows what he's talking about. You know, and I think that is actually where, you know, using automation or any kind of technology really does help you elevate yourself and become a much more informed advisor to the people that you're serving in your business.
Perfect. And David, unconscious bias, on the point of unconscious bias, that seems to me that it's a huge factor and mainly comes down to the sort of assessment area. So can you explain a little more about why unconscious bias exists from a psychological background, of course, with yourself?
Oh yeah, you know, as a psychologist, I would say that unconscious bias exists just because of our humanity. And in fact, in psychology, there are more than 180 unconscious bias that have been listed. And unconscious bias, they are just psychological mechanisms that help us save time when we are confronted to the complexity of the world. Of course, can be super effective when we need to survive, for example, in a hostile world, because it helps us to take super quick decisions. But those mechanisms can also be super misleading when we need to precisely analyze what makes a person unique. But yeah, it's a part of our human nature.
Yeah, that's incredible. So unconscious bias is actually the automation within humans.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wow, really interesting. And so with all the benefits that come with automation, of course, there's going to be a handful of problems that exist as well. So when we look at what are some of the main problems and debates that are happening in the recruitment tech space right now, I think one of the most interesting ones for me is the lack of transparency. And what I mean by that is basically we're living in the wild, wild west of technology right now, where we don't have any real official regulatory oversight. So when it comes to implementing technologies, I mean, you've seen the impact of GDPR recently, that all of a sudden people had to go, oh, well, our candidate databases, our ATSs, we need to take another look at how these actually, you know, are working. Who knows what's going to come into place for technology and automation, because it's happened so quickly in the coming years as we're bringing in all this technology to help us. So it's actually going to be a very interesting, and it's definitely a problem for companies, because you have to also have one eye on, in 2 years' time, is this going to be an issue ethically, or, you know, safeguarding privacy, for instance. So that's definitely one of the perceived problems of tech right now. Some of the others, risk of machine learning bias. So we just mentioned unconscious bias, but in terms of machine learning, is actually, you know, machines are learning from our behaviors to increase performance. Who's to say that we're inputting the right data to make sure that that is actually going to be accurate? So this is something we need to be thinking, and we're going to go into a bit later in terms of the implementation of technologies and how you can avoid these kind of problems. And of course, the other one, which I think is it's quite obvious, is that there's so many tools out there, and they're all saying that they use AI and machine learning, and they're going to reduce your time to hire. reduce your cost per hire. So how can you as recruiters actually look at all these technologies and say, well, this is going to be the one that we're going to use compared to B? And David, what are your thoughts on reducing this risk from your perspective as a tech company yourself, reducing some of these risks in terms of transparency and machine learning bias?
For us at SSR, I think it's super important to supervise our machine learning algorithm, and I mean by humans. And what we do is that we conduct impact studies with each of our clients. And the idea behind that is to measure the actual results of our recommendations. For example, did the company hire better performing people, but also more diverse people? Did it create bias toward men, women, or certain age categories? And of course, if we see that there is bias in our algorithm, we modify it accordingly to remove them from the equation every time.
Perfect. And Lee, on the point about the crowded marketplace, as someone who's looking at technologies and for your business yourself, what process do you go through when you're looking at vendors, and how do you differentiate their offerings?
It's a great question. I guess what decision process? Well, I guess before that, I mean, what I would encourage people to do is actually devote some time to talking to them. Actually find out what it is that they're possibly offering. Don't get into a sales conversation, but explore it. Seek some referrals. Ask your network. This is the problem I have. Do you know of anything? And go seek it out. Look at the social channels, see if people are talking about stuff. So use some of the stuff that's already out there to kind of make some rational decisions on who you might want to talk to. I think the key for me, right, having spoken with, lots and lots of different vendors, is that we're always keen to talk about the benefits, but the killer question I absolutely love posing, and nobody expects it, is, okay, so we've talked about the benefits, but tell me about when this goes wrong. What are the conditions where, things do not work out as planned? And you often get some amazing information in that conversation. And it'll tell you something about your vendor. They'll either be really transparent and hold up, 2 or 3 great examples of where things haven't gone perfectly. And it shows perhaps, I guess, that they're coming from things in the right place, but also that they've learned from their mistakes and they're willing to kind of, change things so that it does deliver. So for me, that is an absolute killer question, and I'd encourage people to go out and actually ask people to explore the conditions when things don't go to plan.
Yeah, that's a really great question to ask. I think if that's one of the top things that people take away from this webinar, is when you're looking at technologies, ask that question, because you could get some blinding answers, and definitely you need to be exploring those every avenue that you're looking at. So now the core essence of this webinar is automation killing recruiting. Now, if you look at the statistics in terms of the predictions for automation in the future, it looks pretty bleak. 1.5 million people in England are at high risk of losing their jobs to automation. So this begs the question, what does the future of recruitment look like, and what does the role of an actual recruiter look like? Now, Gartner's response to that is, don't worry so much. So although you've got some very bleak stats on the one hand, research VP at Gartner says that unfortunately, mostly the calamitous warnings of job losses confuse AI with automation. That overshadows the greatest benefit of AI, which is AI augmentation, which is a combination of human and artificial intelligence, where both complement each other very well. Now, this is really interesting because this is what you mentioned, David, about having a combination of human interaction and technology, and actually the recruiter will just be improving their processes by bringing in technologies. So I think this is a kind of a reassuring quote for any recruiters out there who are thinking, I might need to look for a different career path, because actually what it looks like is just a shift in what recruiters are actually going to be doing. So right now I want to take a look at an example of when automation in recruitment doesn't quite work. And I think this actually echoes the point made by Gardner in the previous slide, how important it is at the early stage of development in AI to have humans all actually correcting mistakes. So I'm just going to give this a quick play.
Amazon software engineers recently uncovered a big problem. Their new online recruiting tool did not like women. The glitch, sources told Reuters, stemmed from the fact that Amazon's computer models were trained by observing patterns in resumes of job candidates over a 10-year period, largely from men, in effect teaching themselves that male candidates were preferable. Reuters correspondent Jeffrey Daston.
The technology thought, oh, Amazon doesn't like any resume that has the word women's in it. Women's, captain of a women's chess club, captain of a women's soccer team, and all women's university, because the company has hired so many male engineers or software developers, data scientists, and so forth, that clearly the unsuccessful candidates are the ones who also would have this word women's in it.
Amazon never solely relied on these online recruiting tools and disbanded the unit that created it by the start of last year, sources said. It now uses a much watered down version for administrative chores. The company declined to comment. Daston explaining that artificial intelligence is only as smart as the information it's fed.
What people say in the industry is garbage in, garbage out. So if you give it bad data or that reflects some bias or whatever, the computer is just going to mimic that.
A growing number of companies are automating recruitment, hoping this will make hiring faster and more uniform. Hilton and Unilever are among those using software made by HireVue, which lets applicants video record answers to employers' questions.
Thank you so much.
HireVue's CEO says his firm analyzes candidates' speech and facial expressions in order to reduce reliance on resumes. Amazon, a source said, has a new team assembled to give online screening another try, this time with a focus on diversity.
Okay, so this is a very high-profile case of bad automation in recruitment. So Amazon have basically given it a go themselves and built their own technology and automation in the process. And David, I understand you've actually written an article on this specific case. So I'm really curious, what are your thoughts and how could this have been avoided?
I know. The Amazon algorithm, in fact, it was just a reflection of the hiring process they had at Amazon. And I think it could have been avoided by studying precisely which criteria to include in the algorithm. And if you include criteria like, academic background or previous experiences, there are major risks to discriminate against gender or ethnicity. I think they could have selected people based on their real potential instead. For example, by assessing their learning agility or taking into account their behavioral profile, because we know those criteria are very well distributed in the general population, and that independently from age, gender, ethnicity. So by focusing on those kind of criteria, you can get rid of some of the bias we saw in this story.
Yeah. So it's a big learning curve for them, and I'm sure they've taken away some great insights to make some changes. But Lee, what kind of implications besides the obvious bad press could a problem like this actually have on a business's recruitment?
Trust, credibility. I think we work so hard. Certainly know that I have to gain trust and credibility from hiring managers. That when there are so many, I guess they perceive so many easier options out there, i.e. recruitment agencies, well, they can do it quicker. So the minute that you start introducing stuff which is perhaps giving you the wrong outputs, they're going to question that. And, that is a serious problem. So I want to be sure that if I'm introducing something that perhaps we've tested it small scale before we take it wholesale, really.
Yeah, that's definitely great tips. And you don't want to ruin that relationship you have. They've put trust in you to bring this together, and then you ruin it. What are the chances you're going to get that trust back? So yeah, I think small scale implementation and testing is really the key before rolling it out on a larger scale. So I've put together 3 steps here you can take to avoid certain problems with technology. And I think this goes back to what you just said, David. First is actually mapping out your process. So don't just bring in tech for tech's sake because everybody else is doing it. Actually map out your own internal processes. Where are the bottlenecks, like Lee mentioned earlier, the time taken to schedule interviews, for instance. Look at where those easy wins are and where that's going to save you the most time before, just bringing in a technology because everyone on the block is actually using it. The second would be to measure outcomes. And I think this is another point back to what you mentioned about small scale implementation before going, expanding it. So once you've implemented it, make sure that you are actually measuring what the outcomes are to start with. And if you see any red flags, you can then add the human element to it and say, well, actually, this isn't what we want. This is what we're trying to achieve. How can we change this? How can we correct this? So don't let the human errors creep into the technology. So that comes back to a point that you mentioned earlier about data as well. Making sure that you know what kind of data from the start you're going to be using to measure the success of the tool. And that's a really important part in measuring the outcomes. And then thirdly, let the tools make you better, because recruiters' roles are changing rapidly, not disappearing. So remember, you are implementing technologies to basically empower you and not to replace you. So, having a tool in place to actually make you a better, as you mentioned, like a consultant or advisor to your hiring managers. So I think these are 3 steps you can easily implement right away to actually, have a more successful go at this technology business. So, Lee, how can we as technology vendors help companies like yourselves during this particular process, and how important is this support in the overall success?
Okay, cool. That's a great question. I think the first thing, just to repeat, is the first bit is that be honest, tell us what we need. Don't overpromise, so that when we are coming to map it out and measure those outcomes, you're confident that you can deliver, where you set our expectations. So that's I guess a first point. But the real key, and I think this is where some vendors really fall down, and is help me adopt it. So yeah, you sold it to me, and let me spend some time, make sure I'm using it right. What could I be doing? And really help me drive the best out of it, because ultimately, if we're getting great results, then we're going to keep buying. So yeah, don't just kind of sell it and leave. I guess help us adopt it and help us make it a success, so that we can help you be successful as well. We've got better stories to share, and more willing clients who are happy to share good partnership stories with you.
Great. And David, how do you guys assess first help in that implementation of your technology? Are there any key things that you make sure you adopt?
Yeah, the first step is always defining super precisely what are the goals our clients want to reach. For example, do they want to accelerate the recruitment process? Do they need to hire better performing employees? Do they want to reduce turnover? And the second step we take, which is very, very important, is to train each of our users to help them have a good understanding of the criteria they can use to pre-select their candidates. And we also train them on how to give proper feedback to their candidates to ensure that there is a good quality of experience, which is crucial. But I think the most important part is to help them measure the outcome of the implementation of Assess First. And if there are any adjustments that need to be done, we do it together. We explain them why we have to make those adjustments and what they can expect from those modifications. Yeah.
That's great. So walking them through each of these steps and giving them that support that they need.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we've talked a lot about automation, where it can be used, the benefits, the downsides, and we've also clarified that this isn't the end of the recruiter, but the recruiters will just need to adapt to using new technologies to better themselves. So what does the recruitment team in the future actually look like? So, I mean, there's going to be lots of different less and more, but here are just a few of them. So I'd expect recruitment teams of the future to be focused less on database searching, interview scheduling, posting and praying, and reactive recruitment. So there's a lot of things there that are just manual, time-consuming tasks. What can they then spend more time doing, in my opinion, would be building relationships with candidates. That's one thing that technology is not going to be able to do, is actually, build that rapport. The second thing, and this is going to be, I'm curious whether people agree with this one, is creative marketing and ad copy. So I'm unsure, and I don't believe that creative marketing always comes from ideas. It comes from spontaneity, and it stems from the human way of thinking. So what I see happen best is recruitment teams that are most effective are the ones that are creative in how they approach their ad copy, their marketing assets. And I think this is a huge part of actually in the attraction strategy, that doing less of the stuff on the left will give them more time to actually be more creative as recruiters. And then, of course, future-proofing and becoming a strategic partner to the business. So that's actually helping out, helping them out and becoming more of a consultant to the hiring manager. So more people-related activities. So Lee, the purpose of automation is to remove a lot of the admin stuff and focus on the more creative, strategic side. How do you think recruiters are going to take to this change in duties? Because it's obviously going to be a big change for them. So personally, how do you think recruiters are they going to enjoy this? Are they not going to enjoy this? And what are you most looking forward to doing and not doing anymore?
Okay. So, I mean, looking at those 8 items that you've gone up on the screen there, for me, if you're not doing the stuff on the right, then you have to worry. Yep, okay, we're talking about robots taking our jobs, run for the hills. The stuff on the left, that can't be enjoyable. That's not where I want to spend my time. That isn't why I do what I do. I love, the reason I get up and go to work in the morning and I'm still with it, having a great time at AGAS is because I'm allowed to do the stuff on the right. And I guess technology is enabling me to do that. And we've only taken baby steps. So, if you are a recruiter and you're enjoying the stuff on the left, you're going to have to start to adapt and start thinking about what type of career you want. Because if you want to do that transactional stuff, then there's going to be tools out there that can do it more effective. I guess, where do I spend my time? Yeah, that creative marketing, it's just picking up on that point, because as you know me very well, that is such a sweet spot for me. It's where I love spending my time, and I think that we should be forced to be more creative, and we should be thinking about how we're, what our point of differentiation is. And for me, that comes down to being a strategic partner with the business and understanding how we sell the problems that candidates can help us solve, not just jobs. And that comes down to that creative brief, which then enables us to build relationships with candidates, because we can speak more authentically about what they're going to do here and why it's a good fit for them and how it will help them in their careers. So that's the kind of conversations I want to be having. That's where I want to spend my time, not with the stuff on the left.
Yeah. And I think if you look at so many businesses are still spending 90% of their time with the stuff on the left and not on the right, that, when it eventually happens and recruiters are going to get more creative, I think it's going to be a really interesting scene, a really interesting space to be in, because we're going to see a lot more happening in terms of employer branding, assessment, and I think people will start getting more creative, and the role will change almost completely. So I want to take a few examples before we zoom in on one or two examples specifically, just exactly how and where technologies have been placed. So here we've got a few different examples of different places in the hiring process, from CV searching to screening to assessments and video interviewing, where companies have introduced technologies such as chatbots, resume searching tools, video assessments. And if you look at some of the actual results from these, we're seeing things like candidate quality recommendations were increased, 38% increase in recruiter efficiency, 90% reduction in hiring time, and 50% reduction in turnover the first year. So these are all, great statistics on how technology has improved the process. So what I want to do now is just maybe zoom in on a specific case study and hand it over to you, David, to explain a bit about this particular client.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Galeries Lafayette is a very good example because, it's a large department store in Paris, and they have many sales associates working there. And when they came to us, it was because part of those sales associates were super performing, others were less performing, and they also have had a problem concerning the turnover of that population because they had a 17% turnover rate over the first year. And they were doing lots and lots of unnecessary interviews. For example, they did for one of their shop, one of the department stores, they did 400 recruitment, and they had to do 2,000 interview. And at the very beginning, the pre-selection for those sales roles was based on the resume, so on keywords, on the type of school people attended, on their previous experiences. And they switched to a pre-selection based on soft skills with assessors. And using that method, they reduced the number of interview. Now they are doing 500 recruitment, and they only do 1,000 interview. And super important, the turnover over the period of 12 months, it dropped from 17% to 9%. And they saw that the performance, the revenue of people who were a 60% match with the predictive model we created with them was 11% more important than the revenue generated by people who were not a good match. And in the future now, they want to target other roles, not only a sales position. And they also decided to use assessors to manage not only their hiring, external recruitment, but also to manage internal mobility, to move people from a role to another, or from a particular department store to another one. Yeah.
That's great. So that's a huge drop in the number of interviews that they've had to actually do. So obviously a huge amount of time saved. Do you know what these people are now spending that time doing that they've saved?
Oh yeah. We were talking about creating a more creative task like copywriting for the job advertising, and so they use it like that, and they do less and less. They do less interviews, but they can spend more time with each of their candidates to create a real connection with them. For example, that was something they were super interested to do, and they do that. Yeah,
that's awesome. So they haven't just gone on holiday then.
And perhaps another point that was super interesting for them is that it helps them recruit more diverse people. Even people who didn't have any background in a sales position, because when you focus on the real criteria that are linked to performance, you can see that sometimes you hire. I have in mind one of the candidates who was a postman, for example, who now is one of the best salesperson in their store. So yeah.
That's awesome. So yeah, great increase in diversity as well.
Absolutely.
So I'll hand it over to Lee now. Maybe you can explain a bit about your journey in terms of where you started and where you're going and where you want to be in the future.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, for me, we're just scratching the surface. There were some obvious places where we were just wasting time. I've already mentioned, the first job for me was just to get off spreadsheets and, introduce somewhere where we could just organize our work for, an ATS. So that was the first thing that we did. But then it was really, about understanding. I guess the challenge for me was we had to grow quite quickly across a short space of time, across territories that I was completely unfamiliar with. So I remember having conversations with multiple job boards, each trying to organize different prices, trying to understand, is this the right channel for me? That was a real key challenge for us. The applicant, once we actually identified our channels, so actually getting through volumes of applications, because we were, I guess, being creative in our ads, and that was catching people's eyes. So making sure that we can identify people quite quickly early on, and be efficient as a team. When we're doing that, actually, I guess, setting up interviews, just that simple stuff, introducing things like Calendly, just to help candidates self-service and booking time, so that we didn't have to have those repeated left messages and voicemails and bits and pieces. So everything was done manually. It cost us a heck of a lot of time, and the business needed hires. And each territory was different. Each job was different. We're not talking volume roles here. So each and every time we're having to look for a different skill set in a different country, in a different language, and that just isn't scalable. So really simple things, were to look at some automated media buying and distribution. So, help us with intelligence. Tell us what companies like us, when companies are like us, and when they're recruiting people like ours, where have they had success? So bringing some intelligence to the table, and then being able to work with hiring managers to say, look, this is where we recommend we should be fishing. So that's helped immensely, and has meant that we haven't had to post in several channels at any one time. That bit is just taken away from us. And then from that, actually drawing on that data to help us inform future campaigns is key. Video assessment, that was an obvious place. So start with a tool that I was initially familiar with, and have changed more recently to something that can help us scale across Europe. I have a real interest in, I guess, England. I strongly believe that the reason that me and my team have been successful is because the amount of time that we spend talking with candidates early on. We work in refrigerant gas. We have to work very, very hard to, reel candidates in. So we do that by talking not about gas, we talk about problems, issues, the challenge and the opportunity. And a lot of that is done on the phone. Video for me offers enormous efficiencies. And right now, today, real life example, I am still spending quite a bit of time talking to candidates, prepping them for the fact that we're going to introduce video, partly because I don't believe that candidates have adopted it, and they're kind of used to it as a kind of common assessment tool, but partly because I just want to minimize that dropout, and I want to still have that kind of contact and make sure that people are keep sticking to process. So am I wasting time there? I guess you could argue possibly. What do I need to do? And this is a real question we've been looking at, is what do we need to do to stop having to have those conversations? And the answer is we need to kind of try and replicate those kind of conversations in different ways. So whether that be video or FAQ documents, and making sure we've got that collateral to help candidates understand what it is that we've got to offer. And I guess then offering them an arm if they wish to engage with us via human. But I'm just not in the place where I'm quite happy to ping them a link and just let them get on with it. So I'm not quite there yet, but we will head there. And I guess where are we at now? I guess the results is driven for us is that we've made about 100 hires, like I say, across 3 countries. 91% of them have been directly through our business. The time to hire it's not something we're necessarily measuring at this stage, but we're averaging about 34, 35 days. So not a bad effort at all. Technology has helped massively. And like I say, these are baby steps. There is still so much that I want to do. Assessment is one of those key areas for us. We're using tools at the moment, but are they right? It's a big conversation. So that's something I want to be looking at in 2020. And I want to be bringing together, I guess, a dashboard of data so that we are just really being intelligent. Every decision we're making is based on evidence and not anecdotal. We've done enough hiring now to help us make better decisions about and support our hiring managers to make better decisions about how we tackle the challenges that we face. So I hope that gives you an overview. Like I say, we're baby steps, nowhere near chatbots and all that wonderful stuff, talent pipelining that's out there. I'd love to be there, but we've got some other basics to cover first.
No, that's great, Lee, and I think a lot of companies will resonate with as well, who are also at the start of their journey. So it's good to see, going from where you have to now. It's gives a lot of people hope that they can also go in that direction as well, and then scale their business with technology. So thanks for that. I think we've just covered a few of the results that we've seen here, so we won't dive into these just now. I think that was a good summary of these different ways that technology has helped you guys at AGAS. So what I want to do now is just as we wrap up the webinar, just give a quick insight into Assess first, just a minute or two, and then we'll wrap up with some end notes.
Yeah, at Assessor, what we do is we created a predictive hiring platform, and basically we created that to help our clients predict how well the candidates or current employee are going to perform and thrive in the job they are hiring for. And using predictive hiring with assessors, you can answer 3 basic questions. First one being, can that candidate do that job? Second one being, within that team. Third one being, in the broader context of my company culture. And for that, every prediction we make is based on the analysis of the potential of people, which is a combination of 3 key factors: the way in which they think, what they want to do, what motivates them, and third one being which type of behaviors they are likely to demonstrate on a daily basis. So 3 key factors: their learning agility, their motivation, and their personality. And recently, we also added a new algorithm to help our clients predict what we call the professional affinity between people. For example, you can simulate the integration of a candidate within an existing team, or see how well a candidate and their future manager are going to work, how well they're going to collaborate over the long term. So that's what we do, yeah.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So a quick introduction to VONQ. Essentially, we help companies with recruitment marketing, help them doing it in a more smarter and effective way. And essentially, we automate 3 processes that have historically been quite time consuming. So one is the media buying aspect, choosing channels, actually contracting channels, purchasing credits in volume. We take that all away and have one central point for media buying. The second thing is distribution. So when you're actually posting out to multiple channels, reducing that process to actually one single posting process. A very simple hack, but one that saves companies a lot of time in this actual advertising process. And the third is analytics. So actually seeing what the results are from your campaigns in real time, using that data to see what is working, what isn't working. And as you have no contracts with channels, you can pivot very easily based on the data that you're getting back from your campaigns. One thing to add is the platform also works on an algorithm that actually is machine learning. So it is learning from all the data that is being fed from all the campaigns that we're running to actually provide recommendations based on the actual job type and country. And it will provide the best recommendation for that specific role. So as all algorithms, the more data it's being fed over time, the more accurate the recommender is getting. So I think we've spoken a lot about algorithms and automation, and that there is a human aspect behind that as well, because we're still seeing that with the algorithm, we have to manually also teach it sometimes. So this is a step that we're going through in the platform to actually make recruitment marketing more effective for businesses. So a few key ending notes as we wrap this up. Is automation killing recruitment? Recruiters' roles are changing rapidly with the amount of technology that's out there, but they are not disappearing. So don't start packing your bags just yet and clearing out the photo frames from the desks, because actually what you're going to have to do is just arm yourself with technical knowledge, as it will help you choose vendors and get the best out of tech and avoid some of the pitfalls that we've discussed early on. So I hope there's some keynotes from earlier slides that will help you avoid those mistakes. And remember, you're implementing technologies to empower yourself and not to replace yourself. So don't bring something in to completely remove yourself out of that process, because you still need to be involved in it. So on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. There are a few questions. We'll get back to those afterwards directly to each person. I'd like to quickly say thanks to Lee for joining the webinar. It was great to have you on, and David for joining and organising it. So thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, goodbye.